What's up, guys? In today's episode of 30 and 30, we're going to talk about how to pick your next bodybuilding show. So I think a lot of people just do whatever show is closest to them when it comes to their bodybuilding competitions. And while geographic location is one of the things to consider, I think a lot of people cut themselves short when they just do the show that's closest to their house. So in this video, I wanted to go over some factors to consider when choosing your next bodybuilding show. So yes, number one, especially for first-time competitors, would be overall geographic location. Ideally, I don't want to have to send a competitor, multiple hours away from their house, if possible, especially for their first show. With first shows, obviously our stress level is a little bit higher just because we have not done that before, we haven't stepped on stage. So I want to try to keep them close and comfortable to home. As we start to go up in the ranks, we have to travel a little bit for a little bit larger shows, especially if they're pro qualifiers, and then especially when we get to the pro level, we have to travel. But that's at the amateur level, especially first-time competitors. Consider geographic location first. Then going out into your second thing to consider, I would say obviously we want to stick within the natural organization. I feel like a lot of us do that, but when considering your next show, what I would look at personally is lighting. Now, how do you know what kind of lighting a show is going to have? Well, here's the thing. A lot of these shows have pictures from previous years, especially if they're decent shows. They'll have a gallery where you could look back, or if you find someone who competed in the last year previous, you could look at their pictures to see if the lighting was decent at that show. Now, I've gone to many shows over my bodybuilding career as an athlete and as a coach, and I'll tell you right now that if a show has poor lighting, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for 1 year, but if they have poor lighting 2 years in a row, I will no longer send my athletes there because we work way too hard to diet that long, to train too hard, to go on a stage and pose in the dark. So if you're a promoter out there and you're watching this video, you better make sure you have good lighting, otherwise my athletes and a lot of other people's athletes are not going to come to your show. I'm not talking about just having lighting, good lighting in the center of the stage. I'm talking about for the entirety of the stage because that's what you need at a bodybuilding competition. You need to be able to see everyone from every single angle and have them in good lighting. So pay money to have good lighting at your shows. Now, from a competitor standpoint, obviously, we talked about geographic location and lighting. Third, I would say it's important to a lot of us, especially as we go up into the ranks, is the number of competitors at the show. Well, once again, how do you really know how many competitors are going to be at the show that you're doing? Well, here's one way to figure it out. You could always email the promoter directly and say, hey, how many people are in this class? As a promoter, they should be willing to tell you how many people they have. Now, what you do have to watch out for is promoters, and they are out there, and they are more frequent than you think, that will tell you that they have X amount of people in a category, and they don't. So, you have to take their word for it, unfortunately, but you have to find out, if you can, how many people are in your class. If you don't know how many people are in your class, but you want a general idea of how many people are going to be in the competition, a lot of the websites out there for the different organizations have a previous show year result. I know the OCB does this for sure. You can go on their website and check it out. And this is what I did with helping some of my athletes pick out their shows for this year. We simply went back to their list and we counted how many people were each in their class, in their prospective class that they were looking to do, or in the entirety of the show. If you look at a show and they only have 30 people in the entirety of the show in all the classes versus some show that has 150, which show would you rather do? Obviously, from a competition standpoint, I would personally rather do the show that has 150 people in it because there would be more competition. We don't diet that hard and train that hard to compete against a couple people or stand on stage alone. So that's another thing to consider, is the overall size of the show. Now, that's pretty much it for the amateurs. Now for the pros. For the pros, what we want to focus on is, yes, geographical location, but even that doesn't necessarily apply. Those of you who've been following me this year know that I traveled across the country to compete in professional bodybuilding. So what did I do? I actually looked at the size of the show, that, and being a little bit more experienced competitor, I already knew which shows were the more prestigious, if you will. And I went and I sought out those. So I did this past year, if those of you who are trying to compete in natural bodybuilding, at least in the Midwest, and then I went to the East Coast. I did the KC Classic, which is the Pro International. I did the Yorton Cup, and then it did IPE Worlds. Now there are some other larger WNBF shows, both on the East Coast and on the West Coast, that I would recommend as well if you're looking to do a big pro show. But do your research, find out which are the more prestigious ones, which give out the best payouts essentially, because where the money is, the people will go. And look at the overall size. If you know that last year they had 20 competitors in a bodybuilding class, that roughly it'll be close to that this year. One thing that you do have to watch out for in pro bodybuilding, though, or just in the pro class in general, is following within your sanctions. Now, there are some promoters out there who don't necessarily follow in any of an organization's particular sanctions. They are unsanctioned events. Those might have a little bit looser drug testing standards. So as a pro athlete, I would personally recommend you staying within the realm of a particular organization. That's not saying that you can't compete in multiple sanctioned organizations. I would just not recommend competing in an unsanctioned event. So if you're competing, if you're looking to compete at your next bodybuilding show, take into fact geographical location, overall size of the show, and then of course, how many competitors are going to be in there as well. As you go up the ranks, you might have to travel a little bit. If you're getting started in the sport, I'd recommend staying a little bit closer to home. As you start to move up the ranks, you want to get a little bit more competitive. You might have to travel a little bit further. And last but not least, make sure the show has decent lighting, because you don't train that hard to pose in the dark. So guys, tune in tomorrow for another episode of 30 and 30. I'll see you then.